Hello, I'm Jesse Weiler here for the Institute on Religious Life and Vocation Ministry, and I'm here with Brother Richard Hirbe, who is the founder and Minister General of the Friars of the Sick Poor of Los Angeles. Brother, how are you doing today?
I'm doing really well. Thank you so much for hosting.
It's a great thing to be able to sit down and talk with you, especially we're going to get into the topic of chaplaincy later, which I'm very excited to talk about. And you told me a little bit yesterday about your the founding of your organization and some great things that are happening. So lots of really great things to talk about. But before we start, would you mind leading us in prayer?
Thank you for asking. I'm going to pray the prayer that my community prays every morning. Gracious God, your son Jesus said, ask and you shall receive. Our Lady of Guadalupe brought your light to a new world and a new people through the dedication of St. Juan Diego. We ask you to inflame the hearts of generous men and women to devote their lives to you in a consecrated vocation as a sister, as a deacon, as a brother, and as a priest, to serve and minister the sick poor of our church. Send us to places that others will not go, and help us to find the treasure as we work with them. We make this prayer in your most blessed name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you very much for that. Yeah, I talked with you a little bit yesterday. I'm actually at the Focus conference, the Seek conference for Focus today in St. Louis. So I'm in my hotel room, and then after this show, go right back out there speaking with people. But the reason I mention that is because that's a wonderful place to see priests and religious out in the world at these conferences, and it's such a beautiful thing to see how many priests and how many religious come to this in great numbers is a great way to kind of let people know this is a real thing, and God might be calling you to that. To that degree, I want to hear a little bit about your vocation story, which you said is pretty interesting. But how did you hear the call, and where did that lead you?
Actually, I was born and raised in Granada Hills in the San Fernando Valley. And as a young boy, I would play with my buddies at the San Fernando Mission. They would be cowboys and Indians, and I'd be Father Sarah. And it was a wonderful time in my life, free and just full of history that surrounded us, and a loving pastor at the local church, and sisters who lived their life on the edge. They were seen as missionaries back then, Carmelite sisters. I can, as far back as I can remember, my call was to serve God, not as a priest, but as a consecrated person, as a brother, in imitation of, I guess at that time it was St. Francis of Assisi. And after high school, I was a conscientious objector to the military. So I was granted a CO status, and I had to go to nursing school for a year. And then I worked on life flight in Oklahoma. And that's when I met a group of Capuchin Franciscans from Poland, and my heritage is Polish. These Capuchins were all incarcerated in Dachau and Auschwitz during the Nazi occupation. And they made a pact with themselves that whatever segment liberated them from the concentration camps, that's where they would go build their monastery when they were free. Mm. So they were actually liberated by General Patton's infantry, which was compromised from men out of the state of Oklahoma. So with the money given to them by the German government and the United Nations, they came to Oklahoma and built a monastery in a little town called Broken Arrow. And I was the first American that they accepted into their province. And It was a wonderful time. Really got my hands involved in the earth in Oklahoma. Hardworking people. Had some great masters teach me the fundamentals of religious life. Tancred was the book that we used. The Spiritual Life. It still stays with me today. Eventually made my way then to California. And because of my nursing background, I went into chaplaincy and worked with the Sisters of Mercy in Oxnard, California, and applied for a position at St. Francis Medical Center that was 36 years ago. And became the director of spiritual care and medical ethics. 22 years ago, responding to a trauma, my life was drastically turned upside down. It was a young man who was shot in his front yard. by a drive-by, and his brother was sitting in the garage when he heard the bullets ring out. So he did what a brother would do. He jumped out of his chair and ran into the front yard to help his brother, who he saw on the ground. And the person who shot his brother then shot him. On my way to the trauma, there was a deputy who stuck out his hand as he saw me running, and he said, "Slow down, brother, it's an NHI." An NHI in our community meant no humans involved. It was an acronym. It's probably a gangster, don't waste your time. And I looked at him and I said, "Sir," I said, "not at St. Francis." I said, "Everybody is somebody. Somebody's mother, father, sister, brother, aunt, uncle. We all are connected ultimately to God." When I saw them bring the first boy in, they were doing CPR, chest compressions, and he wasn't moving. A few minutes later, the doors burst open again, and in comes the second boy. He wasn't moving either. First boy, Hector, sustained a gunshot wound into his cheek that ricocheted into his cranium, kept spinning, and turned out his lights. Second boy, Caesar, sustained a gunshot wound to T4. He had a complete spinal cord injury, not to move anything below his nipples. The next day, I met with a neurologist and Mr. and Mrs. Galan, the parents of Hector and Caesar. And the neurologist told the parents that their first boy was brain dead and that he needed to take him off the ventilator. There was no cure. And his second boy, their second son, Caesar, was paralyzed from his chest down, would never walk again. The physician said, "Any questions?" And the mother looked at me and she said, "Brother, can you tell my son? We don't have the words." I said, "Yes." Walked into the intensive care unit to unit 32 and slid back his door. And I said, "Son, I'm here at the request of your mother. Don't shoot the messenger." I said, "I'm here because your mom and dad don't have the words. But I'm here to let you know that we need to let your brother Hector be free. God is hungering to hold your brother. But as long as he's on that ventilator, that's not possible." I said, "Your brother will never wake up again. It's called brain dead. There's no flow of blood to the brain." And Caesar shook his head and said, "Can you do me a favor?" I said, "Anything, son. What is it?" He said, "Can you take me to see my brother so I can say goodbye?" And I said, "Absolutely." I unlocked his gurney and I wheeled him into his brother's room. Put their gurneys together, and Caesar reached over and held his brother's hand and said his goodbyes. 10 minutes later, I said, "Son," I said, "you did a great favor for your brother. You did something your parents couldn't do. Your brother's now free." Wheeled him back to his room and I said, "Son," I said, "it's not over." I said, "Your brother's with God." I said, "and your suffering's just beginning." He said, "The bullet you sustained left you paraplegic." He said, "You'll never walk again." And he traced his fingers across his chest as if he was walking. And I said, "No, son, it's not in the cards." So he grabbed my chute and he pulled me to his face and he said, "Brother, if I'm never going to walk again, can you teach me how to fly?"
Wow.
And that sense of redemptive suffering just took away my breath. He took something ugly and made it beautiful. He took darkness and made it light. He took despair and made it hope. The cross was now a sign of victory. So I said, "Yes." I said, "I'll teach you how to fly." The next day I went to Cardinal Mahoney and I told Cardinal Mahoney that I wanted to open up a flight school. And I'm sharing the story with the Cardinal and we're both in tears. And he gave me his blessing. He said, "Brother, start your flight school. Teach the paralyzed how to fly." So initially there were 4 of us in the community, most of us in nursing and chaplaincy. We were made a private association of the faithful. We were invited to the Vatican and we were able to present Pope St. John Paul a copy of our statutes in 2002. And a year to the day that Caesar was shot, April the 4th, the following year, I hired Caesar as a full-time trauma chaplain at the hospital because
Wow.
Caesar now had an experience and a gift that none of us had. He was a wounded healer, and he began to change. He began to change lives immediately. It was magic on wheels. It was just God's presence throughout that entire hospital on those wheels. And we're an inner city hospital. We get 5 and 6, sometimes 8 drive-bys a week. So he was a pretty busy young man. He began to accelerate in his studies, was accepted into a CPE program that required a master's. But because of his experience, his faith, his tenacity, his hope, they accepted him and he excelled in the CPE program. 6 years later, he wheels into my office and he said, "Brother, I want in." And I said, "Oh, now you're so good, you want my job?" And he said, "No." He said, "I want to give my whole life to God. I want to join your community." So we got the necessary dispensations and he entered the community and began to continue to work at St. Francis. And just 6 years after that, after 13 years of employment at St. Francis, he left after his final profession and entered the seminary of the Archdiocese of Los Angeles, began his studies for the priesthood. May of this year, he was ordained a transitional deacon, and he'll be ordained a priest on June the 3rd by Archbishop Gomez in the Cathedral of Our Lady of the Angels.
Wow.
There are 8 of us in the community. 6 of us minister in the Archdiocese of Los Angeles. We have one brother ministering in the Diocese of Orange. And we have one brother who is a priest and a physician. And he has a mission for us in San Luis, Rio, Colorado, just on the other side of Yuma, Arizona. So we're continuing to dig our heels in deeper, go deeper in our spirituality and trying to discern more and more what it is that God is calling us as a small community of friars to do for the sick and the poor. And it's just like rain falling from the sky for us. It's been a wonderful journey.
What was it about the chaplaincy ministry that really drew you in? Because on the surface level, it sounds like it would just, lead to lots of despair in your heart from seeing all these traumatic things over and over again. What drew you to keep going back and keep pushing forward?
I suppose the element of hope. And also, it's really not that hard. By that, I mean, the requirement of a good chaplain is to be an effective listener, to receive the story, to receive the pain that's coming, to embrace it with those that you're ministering to. And we call it in our community standing in the fire, like Mary and John on Calvary. Mary didn't scream. She didn't try to take her son down. She wasn't cursing. She was there in loving presence and acceptance to the will of the Father and embracing that cross even tighter, as was John. John didn't flee as the others did, but stood in the fire. So chaplaincy is encountering each individual where you meet them without an agenda, helping them go deeper in their own spirituality, trying to glean from them their image of who God is. Is it a God that does magic? Is it a God that does miracles? Is it a God that is there to condemn or one that is to heal? And then you work with that and you eventually transition them into a God who can only embrace and love them, to get them to believe that there is nothing that they have ever done that would cause God to love them less. And likewise, there is nothing that they can ever do in the future that would cause God to love them more. He would cease to be God because God's love is unconditional. So it's just, it's mind-blowing when you think about it. I mean, the great point of meditation is just how encompassing. I mean, where else do we experience that type of love? I mean, we yearn from that from the womb where we were held so secure. And then we come into the world and we're continuing to look. I mean, Augustine says our hearts are restless until they rest in God. And I think that's exactly what he meant. That when we return to the Father is when we can be quiet again. So that's chaplaincy in a nutshell.
And what strikes me is quintessential to the ministry is that a lot of times you're being asked to to jump into a situation where somebody is forced to be vulnerable in a way that they never had to before. And they have to start asking questions about their life and who they are. And if someone's not there being the face of Christ for them, that could be incredibly difficult. And I would imagine sometimes they reject it and they say, no, 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 and I'm sure you have stories about that too. But I want to talk about this young man who joined the community and the fruits, because we don't always get to see the fruits of our labor, but you have this wonderful story about this great fruit from some of the work that you're doing. And undoubtedly, there's more than just him. But what's great is you get to be a part of not just him as a fruit, but the people he will serve and touch as well. And really opening a door to Christ through somebody else. What has that experience been like for you?
Each of the brothers in the community have a particular story that brought them to the Friars of the Sick Poor. And each of their stories is as deep as Caesar's. The world can relate much more to Caesar's story, but each of the other brothers have been as vulnerable as Caesar. And it's in our coming together as a fraternity that we're able to explore that deeper and to journey with one another that enables us to then journey with those who we minister to. Our foundation is hope, coming from 1 Peter 3:15. Be ever ready to tell them the reason for your hope. Crucified, but alive. Dead, but risen. Buried, but arose. Just total opposites. And that's what Christ did for us through his resurrection. For us, our focus is on the hope of the resurrection. That death does not have the last word. We are not conquered by death.
Mm-hmm. I like what you say about the opposites. I mean, in order to truly live, we need to die, and in a real sense, to live in the heavenly kingdom, we need to die and literally, leave this earth and die. But we need to die to ourselves as well, in a very spiritual way. And you're coming from this Franciscan spirituality, and nobody, I think, understood that paradox as good as he did. I've mentioned this before with other Franciscans on the show, but G.K. Chesterton writes that Francis saw the world like he went into a cave and came out walking on his hands, seeing the world upside down. I mean, he did. He saw things backwards in a way that nobody else did, and he did a lot of good for the church, helping people to understand that. And sometimes we just need to take the scales from our eyes. My first question for you was, that's got to be depressing, being around those situations. And your response was, no, it's hopeful. That's backwards. We don't understand that. And so I really appreciate that perspective. And, for this young man to not only be a part of, major reversion or conversion in his life, but then be a part of a community, and then to the full extent, being ordained a priest this coming June, that has to be pretty fantastic. And you mentioned to me earlier that he'll be the first priest to be ordained as a paraplegic. Can you tell me more about that?
Sure, but let me go back to your comment on Francis. So what's amazing about Francis, and people miss this often, is his point of conversion was when he dismounted the horse, he walked over to the leper and embraced his brother. And Chalano, his biographer, says he did more than embrace him. He said he gave him a holy kiss. Imagine for Francis to dismount that horse in his regal robes and coming from a regal family, and to kiss ugliness. And in kissing ugliness and woundedness, it became pure. He transformed that leper into a bride, something so glorious that the Psalms talk about that there's not even adequate language to express what Christ can transform something ugly into. So Caesar is, the wounded healer, and all of us are. I mean, it's not so much. I mean, when patients come into the hospital as an effective chaplain, we don't focus on what brought them to the hospital. That might be a fractured leg, an automobile accident, a drive-by, a stroke, cancer. What we focus on is what's called regression work. We go back to where their pain began first. And for many people, it's really childhood stuff and trying to let go of that, particularly for the poor and trying to eke their way through a life of poverty as far back as they can remember, and how that affected their social system, their behavior. So that's, although they might be in for a broken leg, their heart is suffering from something else. Maybe dad was never home. They saw their mother working 5 and 6 jobs to bring home meat for the table or bread for the table. Not being able to go to school because they have no shoes.
Mm-hmm.
That's where the church is so effective in taking people to that point and allowing that to become their moment of redemption. Just acknowledging that and uniting it to the life of Christ, who is like us in all things but sin, and gives us hope.
And you know, you mentioned this in the very beginning too, with Caesar, human not involved. What's more of a poverty in our lives than to not even be considered human, to just be considered, you know, a thing that happens, a thing, you know, quite literally. But to work towards understanding and approaching somebody, starting with human dignity and going from there, which is not, you know, not always a thing that people get to receive all the time, as we just talked about.
You are 100% correct. You got it. You get an A on the test.
Yeah, I didn't know there was going to be a test later, but I'm glad that I'm prepared for that.
For
So,
us, let me
go
cut
ahead.
in.
Go ahead.
For us as friars of the sick poor, you touched on it correctly. Our poverty is interpreted as availability. That what renders us as friars of the sick poor is that when we hear the cry of the poor, we stop what we're doing and we attend to that cry. I mean, what is more valuable today in society than the element of time? Who really has time today? And yet, when we hear the cry of the poor, it demands us to stop. And I tell the brothers often, you know, if something is keeping you away from a meeting, it better be the poor, because that's your first obligation, even before your obligations to your brother. It's to those who you consecrated your life to serve them in the message of the gospel. I mean, psychiatrists, social workers, therapists, I mean, who can afford them today? I mean, nothing is for free. But as religious, as consecrated men and women, we're able to sit in the midst of their suffering and allow them to feel like they have a companion, someone to share their bread with.
You know, my question about, you know, my next question is about the future, you know, of the community and the importance of chaplaincy. So, can you tell me a little bit about, you know, the next plans and steps for the community and where you'd like to be and how you think you might get there? Because it's obviously a very important thing, but it seems like, you know, sometimes it could be an uphill challenge, an uphill battle to try and keep pushing towards this, because the culture doesn't want that. The culture wants to ignore the, you know, the poor and ugly thing. So how is your community going to, you know, push forward through that?
To continually focus on being what religious must do, and that's being countercultural to society, to living a life as if we were already in the kingdom. That's what's going to continue to give us depth. And I tell the brothers, you know what? We're only 22 years old as a community. So we really have no history. We're making our traditions. We're making our way forward. But let's focus on depth. Let's not focus on numbers, because the winds are going to come. And when they blow, we need to have some deep roots, or else we're going to be uprooted and fall over. I mean, each one of us is responsible for the other in this community. And the litmus test is how we align ourselves with those we serve. That must be our first priority. God called us not to be of service to one another, but to be a service to everyone. And so it takes an exceptional. Judge Judy says you have one mouth and two ears. So I tell the brothers, you know, when you leave your house that day, you know, clean your ears out and wait for the cry of the poor. Our future, I think, is continuing to evolve. We have one brother who is the director of mission integration for a very wealthy Catholic school in the Archdiocese. And I was asked, so sick poor, and you're in the wealthiest school in the Archdiocese, what's the story? And brother was able to explain to us, you know what? I'm able to mold the minds of those men and women who have the ability in the future to change the world. So if I can touch their hearts to the poor and let them be sensitized to the needs of the poor and the sick, we're furthering our mission. And that's exactly what he's doing.
Mm-hmm. And we can't forget about the spiritually poor too. I mean, there's lots of ways to interpret that too.
So
brother.
Hey,
go ahead.
So on that point, we have a priest chaplain, Father John, who is at Cedar Sinai, a very well-known hospital that serves a lot of the stars in Los Angeles. We also have a brother who's there as a nurse, and in that environment, you talked about the spiritually poor. That's exactly what their presence is there. And nobody knows this, but Cedar Sinai is the #1 hospital in the United States for charity care. And for Father John and for Brother Don to be a part of that milieu, to see the rich giving to the poor, it's just absolutely stunning.
Beautiful. That's really beautiful. Well, brother, we're going to keep praying for you and your ministry here. And, one side note, I've been doing this show for about 3 years now. I've done, well over 100 interviews. And today was the first time Judge Judy was brought up in one of these. So you win a prize for that. You passed the test for most obscure reference on this interview show. If people want to find out more information about your ministry, your community, where can they go to find out more information?
Friersofthesickpoor.com. You can Google us. Our vocation minister is Brother Don Joseph, and he gives a speedy response.
Well, excellent. Brother, thank you so much for your time. And again, we'll keep you in our prayers. And thank you so much for all the work you do for the church.
I reward you. Thank you.
Okay, God bless.